Hello, everyone, and welcome to another day with Mr. Huffman, right? So, we're now starting Unit 4, which is a little bit of a transitional unit. And I wouldn't say it's exactly a filler unit because there is going to be some really important stuff that happens here. But more than anything, and I would say this is true of all historical eras, but this one in particular is a time of transition, right? We successfully fought against the British, won our independence, had a lot of struggles when it came to kind of writing the Constitution and creating really the fabric of our nation in terms of our government. Successfully, beat the British, or really it was more of a stalemate, but effectively won again against the British in War of 1812. And so this era is kind of, as I said, a little bit of a filler era before really a next more divisive, bigger era that's coming ahead of us, right? In the kind of days before the Civil War. But this is going to be, again, a little bit of a filler era. But there is, as I said, still a lot of important things that happens and a lot of people who are going to make some decisions that naturally put us closer to that path, unfortunately, of civil war. But before we even get there, we're going to actually talk about the era of good feelings, which is kind of the immediate aftermath of the War of 1812, where we're going to see some considerable American prosperity during the 1820s. And kind of similarly, the 1920s was also an era of American prosperity, but also kind of after that, there was obviously the big Great Depression crash. We'll talk about that in American too. Okay, so again, this is in the aftermath of the War of 1812. This era is going to become known as the era of good feelings, which was coined by the Columbian Sentinel, a Boston newspaper. And really, this era of good feelings is going to be just this term people use even now to describe this strong sense of national pride that erupted all across the states in the aftermath of the War of 1812. So, again, a lot of people still thought of themselves as citizens or residents of their state first and foremost, like, say, North Carolina or Virginia or New York or Massachusetts. They still mostly thought of themselves as part of that identity. But there is, after the War of 1812, a lot of national pride that comes as a result of us fighting Britain successfully yet again, that people are going to stand up and say, you know what, I'm proud to be an American. We stood up to Great Britain yet again, and were successful. So the Republicans, they were on the kind of the right side of history in the long run as far as in the lead up to that war. They were the ones who were really pushing for the war, and the fact that we were mostly successful in fighting that war certainly helped their political fortunes. The Federalists, meanwhile, I talked about this already when it came to that Hartford Convention where they had gotten together and talked about maybe seceding from the United States, mostly in the Northeast. Federalists, they're going to be in rapid decline. And really by the mid 1820s, they're going to be kind of a dead party. And the Republicans are really, for a little bit, going to be the only party in America at this time. Okay, so as a result of that, Republicans are going to begin embracing more and more ideas about larger government. So, we talked about the years leading up to this, when it was Federalists versus Republicans. Republicans were almost always in favor of small or local government, and Federalists more in favor of larger government. But since the Federalists are kind of going by the wayside and are going to die out, now Republicans are actually more willing to kind of say, oh, you know what, we need to embrace ideas about larger government ourselves. So that transition is starting to happen, okay? So the last 2 years of Madison's term, again, he was elected in 1808 and then in 1812, and so he's going to kind of serve through 1815 and 16 in the latter years of that War of 1812. Last 2 years, he's going to try to spearhead some ambitious programs that's trying to bring the nation together. One is the Second National Bank. Now, that First National Bank was a success, but its charter had ran out, and Madison and kind of decided not to necessarily renew it. So there's pushes to create a second national bank and also institute more tariffs and also invest a lot in transportation in the nation. So these are all big, ambitious programs that Madison's going to try to push through in the kind of later days of his presidency. So the Second National Bank, let's start with that. The Republicans had blocked the renewal of that bank in 1811, which was actually right before that War of 1812, right? But offered no alternative, okay? So they said, we don't want the national bank anymore. We think it served its purpose, but they didn't offer any suggestions. So not having actually a national bank in the War of 1812 actually hurts America in some way. If we had one, we would probably be our army and our military would have been a little better funded. So actually, it turned out we should have renewed it, and it would have only been a year that would have still been around before the War of 1812 breaks out. But that actually is a mistake. And in its absence, you're going to see more state chartered and private banks, but the currency is not really going to be that regulated by the federal government, which means the currency is not going to be as stable or as reliable. Okay. So, as I said, not having the national bank left the federal government broke, and they had to pay large interest rates during the War of 1812. So, everybody, Federalists and Republicans, both agreed, you know what? Maybe we do need to keep this national bank around, because not having it around put us in jeopardy. Okay. So, in 1816, this guy here, and I'm going to show his picture a few more times because it kind of makes me laugh. Looks like he got, his pants just yanked down, or he got hit in the head with a shovel or something. John C. Calhoun, he's a senator from South Carolina, and he's going to be important for us moving forward. He's going to propose, you know what? We do need to create a second national bank. And that is going to pass, and it's going to basically give the bank rights to issue currency notes, which are going to basically be a national currency, and also says, you know what? The federal government should take control of state banks and should supersede state banks. So that's going to be really important, because in the absence of the national bank, a lot of state banks are going to pop up. And now Calhoun and kind of others that agree that we need to bring back a second national bank are saying, you know what? Not to say we shouldn't have state banks, but the federal government should kind of have more control than the states themselves when it comes to instituting these banks. Okay, so we do successfully create a second national bank, but we're going to see it's not going to last forever, as it turns out, either. But creating a second national bank is going to shore up the currency and is going to bring the nation together financially in a way that it's kind of dividing between state banks is not going to be super successful in. So we do bring back the national bank, and again, offers a better, more regulated national federal currency. So that was kind of one of the big things that Republicans really wanted to get passed in the late teens, going into the early 1820s. Tariffs and transportation, as I said, two other big ones. Okay, so U.S. manufacturers has actually flourished during the boycotts, all those boycotts from Spain or France, where we had to actually make our own stuff instead of getting it from Spain, France, or other European nations. And also during the War of 1812, where we're certainly not going to be getting a lot of goods from them either. And so American manufacturers did really well during those boycotts, right? Because instead of relying on buying from elsewhere, we actually had to create our own stuff. So that's going to create a change where we're going to start to manufacture more of our own stuff during this time than we are importing, okay? But at the end of the war, British goods were, a lot cheaper because they're trying to flood the U.S. market in some ways to hurt the American economy. And naturally, that does to some extent, because manufacturing is not going to be able to keep up with the cheap price of British goods. In some ways, it's like going to your local mom and pop department store, where the prices are going to have to be a little bit higher, even if you're buying local, versus going to Walmart, where the goods are made in China or elsewhere, and they're just going to be a lot cheaper to get, right? And naturally, as an American consumer, you're usually going to go for the cheaper option, and that's certainly going to hurt American manufacturers both then and even now as well, right? So the people, Republicans and even Federalists who are on their way out in Congress realize, you know what, we need to institute protective tariffs. What are protective tariffs? Basically, where we're putting a tax on all the goods being imported here to drive up their prices, which helps, even the load and make it easier for us to buy American. So let's just take, for an example, that you've got a good, let's just say a desk, okay, that you're looking to buy a desk. And that desk here, made in America, is $20, right, at this time, okay? Let's say a very similar desk, maybe not as high quality, but close to being there, right, is going to be $12. Okay, so naturally that 20 versus 12, you're going to want to go for that 12 option usually, right? But this protective tariff says, actually, instead of it being 12, let's tax it a little bit, where now that price is doubled and it's $25. So that $20 American desk is now going to be much more competitive against that what was 12 but is now $25 because all that tariff has been added to it, right? So this is a way to even the playing field and make it where American products are going to be much more attractive and lucrative for the consumer. Okay, so this is going to be opposed by New England shippers and by Southern farmers because they're saying, listen, and these are two groups that wouldn't necessarily agree on some things, right? But even New England shippers and Southern farmers, they're going to realize this could lead to price increases for them, and that, hey, it doesn't matter if the American good is now a little bit cheaper, I'm still having to spend a little bit more money because of the tariffs are so high, right? So in 1816, Calhoun realizes this, and he's got his eyes set for the presidency. He's getting a lot of stuff done. He's actually going to ascend to the vice presidency eventually, but he's going to sponsor a federal internal improvement program as well. Okay, and there's his face again. Mine's blocking it. But it's actually going to be vetoed by Madison, who's saying, hey, listen, and what is internal improvement? That's going to basically building highways. And again, it's not for cars, but for, transportation of horses or carriages or whatnot. Highways, but especially waterways, right? It's kind of about kind of adding on and enhancing rivers, any kind of waterway or lakes, to make them more accessible for us to transport goods via shipping. Okay, so that's kind of that large-scale federal internal improvement program. And Madison, who's still president, he's going to veto this because he's saying, no, listen, this is not enumerated in the Constitution, that this should be up to the states. Again, Madison, he's more of a Republican in the sense that he's advocating, said, hey, this should be a state and local affair. The federal government shouldn't be all about this, okay? However, private business and state and local governments are going to start expanding road and canal construction on their own. So while the federal government isn't going to take the biggest stand in doing this, the states and local governments are going to start, and also private business sees an interest in this. They're going to start building their own roads and their own canals that are going to help really the rest of the nation. So while it doesn't exactly happen under the federal government, it is going to, private business and state and local governments are going to start building more roads, are going to start building more canals. And on a practical level, it's about kind of, sharing goods and kind of helping the economy. But on a more idealistic level, what happens is it's making it easier for Americans to travel different places, right? That most Americans really only knew their local town or their local area. But now through canals and roads being built, it makes it easier for them to travel a little bit. Okay, so it ain't like they're going to some far-flung place way far away from where they're at, but it allows a little bit more travel, and it allows Americans in some ways to come together because naturally they're going to be more connected. So there's a practical element to that, but also an idealistic kind of human level to that. Okay. So what about the courts? The courts are also going to go through some changes as well. So the Marshall Court, and I mentioned John Marshall, again, he was appointed by John Adams in 1801 before he left office. A lot of rulings that he does during this time are going to have very powerful impacts on the nation. And I don't need you to write these down necessarily, but they are important in their own ways. Martin versus Hunter Lease in 1816, the court has the authority to hear all appeals involving federal statutes and treaties. So any federal statutes or treaties that happen, the court has the right to look at them and make sure they're constitutional. Okay, you might have heard this back in the days of your civics days. McCulloch versus Maryland. This is in 1819, and this is a court case that says the federal government has a right to have a national bank, and that's as these national bank issues are being declared. And necessary and proper clause, which is going to be one of those things that Hamilton kind of had advocated for years before, saying, hey, the federal government deems it is necessary and proper to create a national bank, then that's going to be the thing, right? And so that is going to, McCulloch versus Maryland gives a lot of credence to, hey, the federal government has every right to create a national bank, okay? Gibbons versus Ogden, that has to do kind of with interstate commerce, ruling that, hey, the federal government's going to have a bigger say in interstate commerce, in its enforcement, in its drafting, and all that stuff. So kind of long story short, all of these court cases by the Marshall Court are going a long way when it comes to giving the federal government more power, okay? So while the Republicans, as I said, they're now in office, the Federalists are kind of on their way out or finished, basically. So you would think, oh, Republicans, they would give all this power over to the state and local governments. But this just goes to show you that once they're in power, they want to give the federal government actually more power than they had advertised, right? So due to these Marshall decisions and in part with what's going on in the White House and what's going on in Congress, the federal government's going to be getting more power during this time, right? And again, in particular, really comes down to that McCulloch versus Maryland, that for the most part, anything the federal government deems as necessary and proper to the welfare of the nation, then that's really going to be what happens, and that's what's going to pass. Okay. So what about diplomacy? What about our kind of foreign policy kind of things, right? So Southerners are still anxious and angry and frustrated by the Spanish in Florida, right? Because they realize that, some of our more southern states here, Georgia in particular, if something were to break out between us and Spain, we're still going to be the ones who have to, actually go to war with them or actually have to fight. So Southerners are saying, hey, listen, we've got this situation with the Spanish that we never know could break bad. You need to pay more attention to us northern states. And a lot of the northern states, whether they were Federalists or Republicans, are a little bit turning a blind eye to their kind of Southerners down there. Okay. Also a problem, runaway slaves from the South love to run away to Spanish Florida, right? And so they're saying, hey, we need some sort of enforcement for having the jurisdiction to go capture these runaway slaves and bring them back. So that's also going to be a problem, right? That, hey, slaves are running away to Florida, and also the Spanish are there as well. Native Americans is another problem there, right? So Seminoles were a group of, it's kind of a series of Native American tribes and nations who are mostly retreating Creek groups, runaway slaves, and other Native American nations. Seminoles are kind of a hodgepodge of, again, Creek, runaway slaves, and Native American tribes kind of doing their own thing, okay? And naturally, they're often feuding and raiding Americans in Georgia, right? So they're kind of going north, kind of causing havoc, doing whatever they want, and then running back across that Spanish-Floridan border. And Americans or Georgians can't really go down there and get revenge because Spain would get mad. You might be thinking, well, what does Spain think about all this? They're really not even paying that much attention. But if Americans were to go down there, then that would cause a problem, okay? So again, all this adds up to more Americans, as you can imagine, particularly those in the South, are going to be clamoring for war with Spain to settle this issue because they're saying we need to go to war with Spain just so we can kind of get Florida out from under them, and we can kind of squash this problem. Okay, so runaway slaves, that's a problem. These Seminoles, Native Americans fighting us, that's another big problem. So both those combined are going to be a big reason why Americans, especially Southerners, want to go to war with Spain so we can kind of take Florida and not have to worry about it. Okay. So in 1818, Andrew Jackson, he's still a general. He was a general during the War of 1812. He's going to be ordered by John C. Calhoun, who at this point he's going to be Secretary of War, to stop these raids by the Seminoles. Okay. And there's Calhoun yet again. What's going on here? Okay. Anyways, so John C. Calhoun, he was shocked as well by what just happened. Okay. He's going to order, again, Jackson to go down there and fight the Seminoles. Okay. So what does Jackson and his men do? They're going to destroy villages. They're going to straight up disobey orders by actually going even further into the territory than they had expected. Calhoun had really just ordered him to say, okay, just really kind of take northern Florida. Jackson doesn't like to play by any rules. He's kind of his own man, does his own thing, and decides to go even further and takes even more of Florida than he had been ordered to do. And he's also even going to go as far as to go south and remove the Spanish governor from power. So this is not just about fighting the Seminoles anymore. Jackson takes it upon himself to actually go down there and invade basically the entirety of Florida and drive the Spanish out totally. Okay. Naturally, the Spanish across the ocean are saying, hey, this Jackson guy, he needs to be punished. We didn't sign off on this, that this is outrageous. He needs to face some sort of a punishment. Okay. So Secretary of State at the time, John Quincy Adams, okay, who is actually, believe it or not, the son of John Adams himself and also a future U.S. president, he's going to make sure to go there and try to start negotiating with the Spanish, okay? So he's going to negotiate with the Spanish and say, hey, well, listen, you need to be kind of more serious about policing the Seminoles and making sure they're not getting out of hand. Okay. So he says, if you're not capable of policing the Seminoles yourself, then we're going to go down there and police them for you. Okay. And again, this is John Quincy Adams, son of John Adams. Okay. And what's interesting is Quincy Adams is kind of taken up for Jackson here. But what's interesting is in the next decade, they're actually going to be running against one another for office. Okay. So this leads to the Adams-Onis Treaty in 1819, where Spain, and they've been dealing with a lot of problems throughout all of Latin America. They're having a lot more independence movements, have been starting to rise up and take over territories from them. So they're dealing with a lot of stuff. So they're like, you know what? We don't want to deal with this situation. We got to deal with Mexico. We got to deal with a lot of other problems in Latin America. So you know what? America, feel free to go ahead and take Florida from us. We're sick of dealing with this. And so Spain is going to lose Florida, and Florida is now going to officially be in possession of the U.S. And all this really, these international tensions between us and Spain are going to lead to a much bigger idea that I would say is still really effective today, known as the Monroe Doctrine. Okay, so as I said, in 1824, a lot of Spanish colonies throughout the mainland had declared their independence. So Spain's regional and global power had been slipping for some time. Now, this goes all the way back to Unit 1, right? That for a long, long time, Spain had been a massive power, okay? But over the last several decades, their power had been slipping and slipping and slipping more and more and more, okay? So there's going to really be this quadruple alliance that had formed itself in Europe, where it's Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia. All European nations who are allied and trying to stop any sort of anti-monarchical movements throughout the world, not just the Americas, but throughout the world. And they're realizing that if all these movements that are happening in all of our colonial territories, if word spreads about this, that could be more and more revolts in our territories. So we don't want that to happen. Okay. So Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia all are kind of, and Prussia is kind of the name for Germany at this time. Germany doesn't become a unified nation until some years later after this. So all of them are saying, should we help Spain in the Western Hemisphere? Britain didn't really think so, because Britain realizes, listen, we've gone to war with the U.S. multiple times, and if we back Spain and back all this kind of other stuff going on in the Western Hemisphere, that might yet again put us in conflict with the U.S., and that's not something Britain was all that interested in, okay? Because U.S. and Great Britain had been making a lot of money in the Americas, trading with one another without Spain around. So they're actually slowly, the U.S. and Great Britain had been slowly building an alliance with one another, and they see Spain as a stumbling block in that. So Great Britain is not going to really support Spain in the way that they should have maybe been in the past. And this really leads to the Monroe Doctrine. And so James Monroe, he's president when this is going to be issued, and this is basically a presidential proclamation that's declaring, hey, listen, the North and South America, basically the whole Western Hemisphere, we're saying that's off limits for further European colonization. That basically America's drawing a line across, not quite half of the whole world, but the whole Western Hemisphere, and saying, listen, no, this is all of our territory. All you European nations, get out, stay out. We're going to basically police this area, okay? So basically, it's us, the United States, saying the Western Hemisphere, North and South America, strictly our turf. We're the big dogs here. Every other European nation, which was mostly Spain they were talking to here, needs to get out here. And my face kind of blocking that, but saying, look at me, I'm the captain now. Okay, so we're saying we're the captain of this whole part of the world. All you European nations, get out. And you might be thinking, well, Great Britain, wouldn't they want a stake in that? They were actually at this point mostly concerned with the Eastern Hemisphere as far as building colonies in Africa and in Asia. So the Americas, for the most part, Great Britain realized, you know what, we're done with that. And we've got basically a soft ally in the U.S. In the Western Hemisphere, so maybe let's just trade with them. Spain, meanwhile, they're slowly losing more and more colonies by the wayside all the time. And so really it's us talking to Spain more than anybody else. But in general, we're telling all these European nations, stay out of the Western Hemisphere. This is the domain of the United States. And there's just one last image for you of John C. Calhoun. Again, looks like he's being pantsed or he's, I don't know. It's like he's just got hit in the head with a frying pan or something. So that's it for today. Kind of starting off a new unit. There'll be some more stuff to come. Obviously, very soon. As always, if you have any questions about anything, please reach out to me and I'll be happy to answer them. Take care.